everybody, it's Mr. Wagstaff. Cool stuff to talk about today. So today we're going to be talking about Reconstruction, and there's no real rule book for how to put a country back together after a civil war. So there's multiple schools of thought on this, and they don't necessarily see eye to eye. Let's get started. Yesterday we had started talking about Reconstruction at the very end. Basically, you have to reconstruct America moving forward, because clearly with sectionalism you had two very different countries. I mean, literally, you had the United States of America and then the Confederate States of America. Now you have to bring them back together. So we talk about Reconstruction. You have to rebuild something. What is it we're having to rebuild? Well, this is Atlanta in 1866. It had been burned to the ground by Sherman. Richmond also burned to the ground. Who set it on fire is still up for debate and by modern historians. So the South is pretty much destroyed. On top of that, the entire federal government is Republicans. Or I shouldn't say the entire. There were slave states that stayed part of the United States of America, so they still had representatives in Congress. And the slave states, granted, 13th Amendment, there's no more slave states, but the states that were previously slave states, those are Democrats. But there's not a lot of them. So the Republicans run everything, but the president now is Andrew Johnson, who is a Democrat since Abraham Lincoln had been assassinated, and Andrew Johnson is the vice president who now is becoming the president. And there's about to be a real power struggle here. So this doesn't really catch anybody off guard, specifically talking about Reconstruction. So the idea from the beginning was, if the North wins this war, how do we put the pieces back together? So Lincoln, obviously during the war, Lincoln was alive. In 1863, Lincoln comes up with his Reconstruction plan. His idea on how we should move forward as a country as a whole when the war ends. So when he presents this to Congress, he gets some pushback from this. His concept is that the South can come back in. You just have to have 10% of the voters 10% of the people that get elected prove that they never supported the Confederacy at all. I mean, if you only take 10% of the population and make sure the elected officials, that they didn't support the Confederacy, that means you can have like 90% of the elected officials in a state could have been Confederate military personnel. Lincoln's like, absolutely. And like, why would you even have a 10% concept here if that's the small as a number? Basically, Lincoln wants snitches. If the state starts doing something crazy, he wants somebody that's going to tattle on them. That's the only reason for the 10% plan. He basically just wants to bring America back in. That's his only goal here. Bring America back in during the war. He ends up ending slavery as well to try to prevent this from happening again. But the 10% plan is Lincoln's very lenient concept to try to bring the South back in. He's not trying to ruffle feathers if the war ends and the North wins, which is exactly what's going to happen. Well, there was quite a bit of pushback against this. There's this other concept called the Wade-Davis bill, where the Republicans in Congress say, no. The same concept of Lincoln, we're going to let them join the United States again, but 51%, the majority of the people that get elected in these states have to have proven that they never supported the Confederacy. You know, the Confederacy had a lot of support, so that's a very small group of people to pull from that have to represent over half of the state's population. But the Republicans, even though Lincoln's a Republican, the Republicans start arguing pretty heavily with Lincoln over where do you draw the line at for requirements of people to prove they never had anything to do with this war or supported this war. So Lincoln, when they pass this law, they send it to Lincoln's desk. Lincoln vetoes it. It's a pocket veto. It means he just holds on to it. They go out of session. It disappears. So Congress is kind of grumpy that Lincoln just ignores their bill here to require 51%. And again, this is before the end of the war, but the war is going well at this point when this comes through. In theory, Congress could override a president. You have to have a 2/3 majority. This is like unheard of. You'd have to really hate the president in order to override a president's veto. So Congress could have done it, but they don't, because you just don't really do that here. It's not really a thing that's done, because typically the president has at least half the popularity in the country. You don't override a veto. I want to specifically talk about that because it's going to happen in this lesson. So the question here is, based on your understanding of Lincoln's primary goal at the start of the Civil War, why does it make sense that his plan would be more lenient than many of the Republicans? So pause me, answer that completely. We're moving on. So all these squabbles over 10% plan, 51% plan, it all gets thrown out the window. Because the guy that's actually the president when Reconstruction, when the actual final concept has to be made, is Andrew Johnson. Andrew Johnson is a Democrat. They thought Lincoln's 10% plan was too lenient. How about 0%? That is what Johnson's Reconstruction plan is. Just pardons them all. You know what? That's fine. Come on back into the country. Nobody in the state has to prove they never supported the Confederacy during the war. He's also going to pardon any Southerners, because there's crimes against people, whatever, that people in the Republicans want to press charges against leaders in the South. Johnson, one of the powers of the presidency is he can pardon people. So Johnson says, you know what? I'm going to pardon everybody here in the South. Congress is furious about this. One of the things Congress does to try to fight back against this plan is that, okay, you can pardon these officers if you want. However, you actually have to meet with every single one of them. You can't just say, poof, thousands of pardons. You actually have to meet with them and have them sign their name in order for it to happen. Because they think there's no way Johnson's going to travel around the country and do this. And Johnson's like, cool, I can do that. Because what Johnson does, again, Andrew Johnson, is he, it's funny because it completely backfires here on Congress. So Johnson has these parties at the White House, all right, where all the Confederate officers will have to come to the White House and have a party. And while they're there, they sign this book, basically, that pardons them. So instead of him traveling around the country in the South trying to get people to sign for them to be pardoned, they have to come to him. And there's basically big parties of Confederate officers at the White House right after the Civil War, which infuriates Congress, which is down the street, that they're all Republicans and hate this. So them trying to stop him from pardoning all these Southerners really backfires on him, because now there's just all these Southern commanders over here in the White House. What I want to point out here as well, all right, before we just throw Johnson completely under the bus, he's a very easy president to talk about being complete trash. The 13th Amendment has passed, which frees slavery. And you're like, oh gosh, what's he do with that? Johnson is still the president of the United States. He's not the president of the Confederacy. He's not, he embraces the Constitution. The Constitution now says slavery is illegal. That is, the 13th Amendment says that. He lets the South know, hey, I'm going to be nice to y'all, and everybody's up here mad I'm being too nice to y'all, but I'm going to be honest with you. Slavery's over. It's done. And that's one of the requirements to join the United States again, is you have to abolish slavery, which is kind of funny because you're like, well, what if they just didn't join the United States? This was the whole point originally of them trying to back out. They didn't have a choice. They were required at gunpoint to join again. But now slavery is abolished. So Johnson was very firm on that. Because at the end of the day, Johnson's like, I am the president of the United States. The Constitution says no more slavery. There's no more slaves now. So this gets pushed through. It's very lenient to Southerners. Really infuriates a large part of the Republicans. And they will start calling themselves radical Republicans. And they adamantly dislike Johnson because they think he's way too lenient to the South after this vicious war. So the question here is, explain why Andrew Johnson's plan upset the radical Republicans so much, and describe how they tried to stop him from being so lenient, like with the pardons. So pause me, answer that completely, and we're moving on. So 4 million slaves are freed instantly. So what do? Well, a lot of slaves said, I'm out, and they moved further north, places to get as far away from plantations and slave culture as possible. A lot of slaves stayed. They do have a skill set in growing cotton, all right, which is important because even though they're no longer slaves, they have their entire life been trained how to grow cotton, or farmers in one way or other. That is a skill set that can make you some money. So a lot of slaves, once they're freed, they're called freedmen, that they continue to grow cotton just in a different format other than being a slave and being forced to. Slaves could own land, but usually they had to work other people's lands because you had to have money to buy land. And when the slaves are freed, they have $0 to their name. Immediately, churches, all black churches get created, all black schools. Congress wants to help freed slaves get back on their feet. And there is a government agency called the Freedmen's Bureau that gets created at the time. So the Freedmen's Bureau does a lot of things. So slaves, when they are freed, they have been aggressively kept uneducated. So how do you get clothes, food? How does society work? Like, how does money work? How does any of this stuff work? That the government sets up these places in the South to basically educate freed slaves and help them get on their feet and assimilate into society. The same stuff is provided for poor white Southerners as well. The same stuff. However, this is when you really see racism in the United States start skyrocketing. It used to always be like a class system. It was there's slaves, poor people, rich people. All right. But now that slavery ends, there's poor white people and poor black people, and rich white people. There's almost no rich black people at the time. In order to kind of justify ranking, you see racism, and the poor whites in society and rich whites started just saying freed slaves are inferior. Black people in America are inferior. If you were a freed slave, you could have been an affluent free slave before the 13th Amendment. You then get lumped in with the same racist mentality. It grows exponentially when slavery, and not that there wasn't racism before the end of slavery, there absolutely was. But when you take away the class system of slaves, racism becomes just extremely powerful. So black people start getting treated really, really bad. Why? Because they're black and America is racist. Like, I like to try to explain things, but racism in itself is illogical because it's a man-made concept that one race is better or whatever than another, because race itself is. So I can't justify why that is. It's just a thing that happens. And it's a big motivating factor for a lot of the decisions that get made here is this belief that white people are superior to black people. I can't justify why that is, but that is the belief at the time. So obviously among white people trying to justify why they aren't equal with what used to be property. So the Freedmen's Bureau designed to help black people. The white people in the South are furious about this because racism. So Johnson, understanding the South is upset about this thing purely designed to help black people, vetoes the Freedmen's Bureau. Cancels it, says it's vetoed. Well, when he vetoes it, something happens that is extremely rare in American politics. Congress, which is all Republicans, and Johnson being a Democrat, Congress overrides his veto with a 2/3 majority. This is extremely rare, all right? Because typically, if the president says no, you don't want to ruffle the feathers of people who voted for the president. But nobody in the federal government in the United States at the time, because they're still bringing the states back in, really supports Johnson. So who cares if what he thinks? So Congress, which is all Republicans, overrides his veto. This is basically what happens on everything after this. Congress passes a law, Johnson vetoes it, they override his veto. It is extremely rare for this to happen, but it happens all the time under Johnson's time in office, and it really goes to show how little power Johnson had as a Democratic president, and basically how the two sides hate each other with a vicious passion, meaning Congress and the president. So Johnson can veto all he wants, but at the end of the day, it gets overridden anyway. So the question here is, the Freedmen's Bureau was passed only due to a congressional override to Johnson's veto. What does this tell you about the relationship between Johnson and Congress? So pause me, answer that completely. We'll move on. So the South got pretty racist pretty quick, all right? They create a separate set of laws for black people called the Black Codes. This is this is almost instantaneous. It's amazing how creative you can be when you want to be hateful to a group of people or an individual person, but in this case, a group of people. So the 13th Amendment says slavery is illegal, except under one circumstance, which is if you're a criminal in prison, they can force you to do labor. So the South, this is just crazy to me how quickly they figured this out, and it's sad. It's sad as a population that this is what happened. The South immediately makes a separate set of laws for black people. Only applies to black people. Black people have to have a job. They have to vagrancy. You have to have a labor contract. Basically, if you don't have a job, you get arrested, go to jail. You're out past curfew, you get arrested, go to jail. You sneeze in the wrong direction, you get arrested, go to jail. There's all these things that are going to send black people to jail. Guess why the South wants to send black people to jail so bad? Yeah, you're with me. You know. They want to send them to jail so bad because then they can use them for slave labor. Because then the jails and the prisons would literally rent out their inmates, which would be black people that are arrested because of these black codes, to go work in the fields, and we are right back to slavery. And the jails are making a profit. Clearly, this is not the intention of what is expected to happen in the South. So the South is under martial law, which basically means that the military is down there enforcing the laws. And the Congress sees this and they're like, all right, you know what? This is some bull crap. We're not going to stand for the black codes. So the Republicans in the North, they're going to pass two more amendments, which take overwhelming support, but the 14th and 15th very much overwhelmingly supported. The 14th Amendment, passed by the Republicans in Congress, says all citizens are equal, right? You don't have different laws for different citizens, like the whole black code. You can't have one set of laws for one set of citizens and then another set of laws for another set of citizens. We're not ranking citizens here. All the freed slaves, they're now citizens of the United States. And not only that, all citizens in the United States are the same, meaning they're under the same set of laws. We don't have a separate set of law for one set of citizens, then we do the other. This effectively throws out the black code, all right? Because the black code only applied to black people. So the black code gets thrown out, and then Congress takes a step further. And this is an awesome, let me just talk about it. Because this is really cool, and then it's sad at the same time. Because of the way it's not enforced. Congress says, you know what? We're going to give freed slaves the ultimate power in a democracy. We're going to give them the right to vote in the 15th Amendment. The 15th Amendment says all males can vote. Women still at this point, not until 1919, will get the right to vote. But this is all male citizens over the age of 21 at the time have the right to vote. Since there are states in the South, like Mississippi, that have the majority of the population is black, and they have the right to vote, there should never be any more laws like the black codes, since those are created by politicians that get voted in by the population. If black people have the right to vote, they're going to vote in non-racist people into office. The federal government sees the 14th Amendment, everybody is equal citizens, and then the 15th Amendment gives everybody the right to vote and pats themselves on the back. The first election, tons of black people show up to vote. It's overwhelming. Here voting, they're putting the beans in the different jars of who they want to vote for. It's overwhelming, and everybody pats themselves on the back. And then they just kind of stop paying attention. Because the South is horrified by the fact that all the freed slaves now are not only equal citizens, but they have the right to vote. They are full-on equal Americans. And then the South blatantly from the 1860s up until, I mean, there's no actual cutoff line, but civil rights movement with Martin Luther King Jr. For 100 years at least, all right? And not that discrimination ended in the 1964 Civil Rights Act, but the South just says no, and they aggressively kept black people from voting, which is a clear violation of the 15th Amendment, which should never have happened. But because the South and the North, after the Civil War during Reconstruction, start getting into this idea they just want to hug it out, that after the North passes the 14th and 15th Amendment, and knowing the South doesn't like it, they kind of just ignore the whole situation, even though the South is going to start trying to get creative ways to prevent black people from voting in the South so that white people and white supremacy can continue to run in the South. And we'll talk more about that in the next unit in the turn of the century. But the question here is, explain how the 14th and 15th Amendments were designed to prevent the South from discriminating against African Americans. Basically, how's the 14th and 15th Amendment designed to hopefully give freedmen and black people in the South the power to basically control their own destiny as a society in the South and prevent these racist laws like the Black Code from coming out? So pause me, answer that completely, and we're moving on. All right, this is a cool story. So Andrew Johnson, everybody in Congress hates him. They're all Republicans. He's a Democrat. They hate him with a passion. They're going to impeach Andrew Johnson. So that term gets used a few times in this course. What does it mean to impeach a president? Impeach means you put him on trial for breaking a law. And then the Senate, if they find them guilty, they're kicked out of office. If they're found not guilty, they get to remain in office. So the main thing here is they have to have broken a law, and then it has to be proven. So to impeach them, there's this idea that they broke a law, and then they vote on it. So Andrew Johnson is a jerk, and nobody likes him, but he hasn't actually broken any laws. So they set a trap for Andrew Johnson. The trap for Andrew Johnson is they make a bullcrap law called the Tenure of Office Act. Now, Andrew Johnson just kind of did whatever he wanted to every day. But the Tenure of Office Act is a law passed by Congress. I should note to start here, the Supreme Court's going to end up throwing out the Tenure of Office Act because they're like, that's a stupid law anyway. So the law here ends up being thrown out unconstitutional way after the fact anyway. But Congress makes a law that says you can't fire your cabinet members. If you hire a cabinet member, they have to serve out the tenure of their time in office. The reason they say this, who appointed all of Johnson's cabinet members? That would be Lincoln, because Lincoln's the one that got elected in 1864 and appointed all his cabinet members for the second term of office. Well, Lincoln gets killed and Johnson takes over. So Johnson, a Democrat, basically all the people that are in the cabinet that are the advisors to the president are Republicans. Johnson has already fired a couple of them. Well, Congress passes this law saying you can't fire them. And Andrew Johnson's like, I can fire whoever I want. He just walks in like the next guy he sees. He's like, Billy, you're fired. Billy's like, oh man. And just out of, because they basically laid a little trap for him, told him you can't do something. And Johnson's like, I can do whatever I want. And goes and fires a guy out of spite. Technically, Andrew Johnson broke a law. The law said, granted, it was a bullcrap law saying he couldn't fire his advisors. Andrew Johnson broke this law. That is an impeachable offense. And for the first time ever, our president is impeached. So what that means is he is brought up on charges. And it goes to the Senate, and they have to vote whether or not he is guilty or innocent. All right? Now, he 100% broke this law. He's guilty, right? So every Democrat, which is not a lot of them, all right? Every Democrat voted not guilty. He's clearly guilty, all right? So they should vote him guilty, kick him out of office. The Congress has been waiting to have him right here. Like, he's only got like 6 months left in office, but they cannot wait to kick this guy out. Well, most of the Republicans are like, he's guilty. And then there's a group of Republicans that's like, nah. Because they start thinking politics. They're like, man, let's be honest here. We created that law because we knew he would take the bait. That's a shady thing for us to do. Yes, he broke the law. Yes, we could kick him out. Number one, he's got 6 months left in office. He has a 0% chance of winning re-election. Like, nobody's going to vote for him. So it doesn't really matter. Another reason why some Republicans are thinking this, that I don't really want to kick him out of office, this is clearly politically motivated. Do we want to start this precedent? All right. Basically, after this, if the Democrats ever get in control, they'll impeach the first Republican president that comes up, and it'll just be an issue. Also, and there's a lot of these guys that voted not guilty, even though he was clearly guilty. They voted not guilty because they view it the same way Abraham Lincoln does. Guys, let's not keep creating tensions between the North and the South, because the South likes Andrew Johnson because he's the only one like kind of fighting for them in the North. So they're like, let's not kick out the one Democrat that's in the government because that's going to hurt relations with the South. We're trying to like hug this out, kind of like siblings who've just been in a big fist fight, trying to hug it out. Let's just vote him not guilty. And then he just sits there and doesn't do anything for 6 months and he leaves office. And that's what happens. So even though more people voted for him to be guilty, you have to have 2/3 have to vote him guilty. And it was just by like 1 or 2 votes. It was very close. And they voted him not guilty. And Andrew Johnson gets to remain in office. We do not have another, nobody even talks about impeachment again until the over 100 years with Richard Nixon. And we'll talk about that story way in future units when we get there. So the question here is, explain why Congress decided not to remove Andrew Johnson from office, even though they had the ability to at the very end of his term. So we talked about a handful of reasons there on why they voted him not guilty, even though he clearly broke the law. But explain why they found him not guilty. All right, that's what I got for you guys today. See you guys tomorrow.